Welcome to Soul Care, a time to listen and to feel your soul renewed. Sometimes the best thing you can do is just listen. Like when your spouse or a friend or your child has had a bad day and you want to know how that was. You might be tempted to give advice, but really, that person probably doesn't want any advice. He or she just wants you to listen. That's the gift you can give. Listening to a loved one is a real gift. It's a ministry of presence when you give your undivided attention to someone who's worried about something. I remember one time it was after school and I was doing an errand. I was a teacher at the time, and a friend spotted me and stopped me and asked me how I was. Well, just that question led me to tears because an hour before that, I had just been laid off from my teaching job. A number of teachers were losing their jobs that semester, and I learned that in 1 week I wouldn't have a position. So my friend hugged me and asked, "Well, what's wrong, Heather?" And so I shared the story of what I had been told and how that made me feel. I shared the anger and the frustration, the questions, and also the shame of that now not being employed. And after I had told everything there was to tell, my friend just said, "I'm so sorry, Heather." And then I thanked her for listening because that was exactly what I needed. Until someone listens, you tend to harbor your thoughts about a problem. Maybe you've had these recordings in your mind, that interior dialogue that goes on, of what you wish you could say or what you should have said or how hurt you are. And until those interior words are spoken outside, aloud, to someone who cares, who's listening, those thoughts harbor and just keep going and make you feel bad. There's a lot of sadness that we're living with now during this COVID time, and a lot of mixed emotions. Brene Brown, who is a popular social worker, researcher, she says we're experiencing grief, fear, anxiety, uncertainty, vulnerability, and the only way to get through it is to acknowledge it. So we're called to be caregivers for one another. We are called to listen as people acknowledge their feelings. Of course, we're all in need of this, so sometimes it might not be clear who is the caregiver and who is the care receiver. But really, when someone is expressing difficulties and problems to you, you become the caregiver. And the greatest gift you can give is the gift of listening. So often, if you're a friend, you hear your friend say something, and then you turn the conversation around and start talking about your own problems. You start comparing your own hardship to your friends. And then you've taken the attention away from the person with the initial problem to you, and the spotlight is now on you. You've, in a way, missed an opportunity to be a friend, to be a listener for the person who began with a problem. It's a shame, but some of us are not skilled at listening. If you have a problem and you really want someone to listen, you might want to go to a minister or a therapist, someone who's trained to be a listener, who doesn't expect to talk about her issues with you. The professional listener knows she must just be there and listen. Rabbi Lori Klein is the director of spiritual care at Stanford Hospitals, And she thinks that this pandemic is a chance for us all to get better at being compassionate listeners. She thinks that we need to talk about our feelings, the feelings of anger, and especially right now after the death of George Floyd, there is a lot of feeling in our country about the issues of racism. Anger, like sadness, if it's not expressed, festers. Most of us don't really want to debate these subjects. We just want to be heard. What we really need is someone just to listen. And then sometimes the one in turmoil needs to be the listener. Remember Elijah in the Bible on the mountain? He was at a crossroads and overcome with stress. Elijah walked for 40 days and then spent the night in a cave on Mount Horeb. God spoke to Elijah the next day and told him to go out and stand on the mountain before the God of hosts. But God then would pass by. And a great wind came, but God was not in the wind. And then an earthquake came, but God was not in the earthquake. And then after the earthquake, a fire came, but God was not in the fire. And then after the fire, a sound of silence came. When Elijah heard it, he wrapped his face in his mantle and went out and stood at the entrance of the cave. There came a voice to him that said, "What are you doing here, Elijah?" Elijah answered, "I alone am left, and they are seeking my life to take it away." Then God said to him, "Go, return on your way to the wilderness. When you arrive, you shall anoint a new king." And God told him where to go and what to do. Elijah had to withdraw, and he had to wait and listen to find his new direction. He found it in a sound of sheer silence. Some of us are old enough to remember and love Simon and Garfunkel's song, "The Sound of Silence." "Hello, darkness, my old friend. I've come to talk with you again, because a vision softly creeping left its seeds while I was sleeping, and the vision that was planted in my brain still remains within the sound of silence." I always think of that song when I read Elijah. Maybe the sound of silence is lonely and sad in that song, but it can also be a listening silence. God is listening in the silence, and you can be listening in the silence. Just this week I was reading about what it takes to lie in state at the Capitol building. I'm so glad that Justice Ruth Bader Ginsburg had that honor. And I happened on a recording of a former Capitol page who was called to attend the lying in state of President John F. Kennedy following his assassination. George Andrews is his name. He tells of how he was called out of sleep at 4 a.m. to go to the Capitol because the crowd simply didn't stop, and they extended the hours of viewing to accommodate the thousands of people who kept coming to the Capitol to see President Kennedy's casket. George got dressed quickly, and he went to the Capitol, and he helped manage the line of people that kept coming into the Capitol, into the rotunda. After several hours, he took a break, and he went out to a balcony, and there on the balcony, he got some fresh air, and it was a beautiful fall, crisp day. And the sun was rising in the east as he stood there. And to one side, he could see the Supreme Court, and to the other side, the Library of Congress, and straight ahead, he saw East Capitol Street, and on it was a sea of people inching their way towards the Capitol. And this crowd was completely silent. There was not a sound in this mass of humanity honoring the president. Thousands of people, the mass of people walked in sheer silence. George listened, and he just stood there and he watched the sunrise, and he knew he would always remember that moment to the day he died. That moment that brought him comfort and peace. Listen to your neighbor's tears. Listen to your daughters and your sons. Listen to your friends. And listen to the sound of silence when you wake at night and all is quiet. Listen for God in that silence. Be still and know that I am God, says the psalmist. Be still. Just listen and care for your soul.